Hello, BookTube, and welcome to your daily Penguin, your daily Frida. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, and we're hitting all the hits and some of the misses. We've had long stretches of authors, we've had isolated authors, we've had well-known and obscure authors, well-known and obscure books, and there hasn't been any rhyme or reason for quite some time, and I don't know that there's going to be anytime soon. The last rhyme and reason that we had was a vein of Russian writers. But there is a distinct commonality between yesterday's book and today's book. Yesterday's book was Dracula by Bram Stoker, which was published in 1879 and has been in print ever since and has become as immortal and unkillable as its subject matter. And this next book, our Penguin today, is 1845. It's The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and it also, this edition is translated with an introduction by Robin Buss, and Robin Buss points out in the introduction here that the book has entered into that kind of common zeitgeist cultural mind frame where people aren't even aware that it's a book, where it's just part of the culture, much like Dracula, about a man falsely accused of a crime and imprisoned and then seeking his revenge. That the number of people who have heard of the Count of Monte Cristo is infinite. The number of people who know something about it is huge. The number of people who have actually read it, especially in a big, fat, unabridged version like this, much smaller. The Buss edition here I really like. This Penguin Classic I have read once, but I had one before. In fact, there's a duplicate on the shelf over there that I don't need to have two. So I need to figure out which of those two I want to keep. The other one on the shelf is in much rougher shape, and I've read it twice as well. And this one has a bookmark that will please every librarian out there. There's Long John Silver. Dig it up at your public library. Arr. That is an awesome. It's not any particular public library. It's just yay for public libraries. But this is a really big, generous edition. You can find abridged versions of this book everywhere, and probably wisely so. Dumas wrote for money. He wrote at page length, and for some reason, the literary establishment, the literati, among whose number I guess I technically number, for some reason they have always looked down on Dumas and maybe people like Jules Verne for the fact that they wrote for money, that they wrote to cover pages because their contract was largely based on that, because they earned such an amount by page, such an amount by line. For some reason, the literati have always been able to look down their nose at Dumas for that fact, while not looking down their nose at Dickens or Trollope, who did the exact same thing, and for the exact same reason, and which is exactly the same reason why some of their books are so god-awful long. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because Dumas was fairly common in his affect. Maybe it's because he was well known to have one particular co-writer and also a bunch of other co-writers. Contemporary critics referred to the Dumas factory. I always want to be cautious about that sort of thing. I've seen some people who learn that fact and don't know much else, I might say, partly because the English-speaking world hasn't had a gigantic, really rollicking, great 800-page biography of Alexandre Dumas in quite some time. Might be time for somebody to correct that. But I've noticed that a lot of people who learned that factoid and not much else are happy to say that Dumas didn't really write these books, and I never know what to do with that. I honestly never know what to do with that. I have the same response to that I have there was a vogue about 10 years ago of comic book snobs. People who don't so much read comics as meta-read comics. They don't enjoy them. But they like to be snobby about them, and they like to correct people about them. Classic example of this is when I once referred to Captain Marvel as a DC superhero, and as one of these insufferable comic snobs said, faucet hero. And I think I killed him and put his head in the microwave, one way or another. Comic fans will about 10 years ago, had this vogue where they said that Stan Lee didn't write any Marvel comics, that he stole the writing work, the creative genius and imagination of Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby and a bunch of other people, but that he didn't write anything himself. Come on. Everybody knows that. And I don't know what kind of Oedipal forces are at work there, but I have the same response to them that I have to people that say these things about Alexander Dumas. Only it's a little more firm in the case of Stan Lee, because in the case of Stan Lee, let's center on Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, two of his great artists, one for Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, one for the Fantastic Four. We have examples, copious examples, of what Ditko and Kirby wrote like when they were writing their own stuff on their own, under their own name. And it's atrocious. It's absolutely awful. Stan Lee wouldn't have taken it as a first draft. So you have the proof. The proof is right there that Stan Lee didn't steal all this work and slap his name on it. He wrote these things. Same thing. I have the same kind of contention with Alexander Dumas. If you don't think that he brought the essential magic to these works, regardless of what form that magic took. In the case of his most famous collaborator, that collaborator did all the historical research and then broke that historical research down into plot outlines. And then gave those to Dumas, who wrote at speed, sometimes inebriated, sometimes doing a few other things. And those historical outlines, nor the best possible thing that ghostwriter, if you want to call it that writing assistant, or any of his other writing assistants could have made out of that historical outline, would not have sold anything, much less millions of copies, much less as the translator here points out, lodging itself firmly in the cultural consciousness alongside Cardinal Richelieu, who's much better known from Dumas than he is from history, the Three Musketeers. The proof is in the pudding. Dumas brought something irreplaceable and genuine to that collaboration, and he was generous as much as he could be. Money went through his hands like water, but nevertheless, in the Bus translation, this book is rollicking. It's dude, overcompensating, I think. It's big. It's rollicking. It's so much fun. This is one of those novels, much like Dracula, where I just can't imagine my reading landscape if this hadn't always been there. I can't imagine what that would be like. So your Penguin for today is a recommend. It's look a little intimidating. In this particular case, you won't hear me say this often. I would never, in fact, for instance, ever say it about Dracula. In this particular case, if you stumble across an abridged version of this, maybe that's not the Bus translation, feel free. This is a largely unabridged version, and when I think about everything that's in this volume, I can imagine off the top of my head an abridged version that would be a third this size that wouldn't do substantial violence to the work at all. It would do violence because you'd be missing a lot, but not in terms of getting the gist of the plot. So if you want a more gentle introduction to long Dumas than this, then there are ways to do that. There are many abridged versions of this. I wish that I could hold up for you a different version of this. I wish that I could hold up the Lawrence Ellsworth translation. Lawrence Ellsworth has been translating Dumas for years now. I have read all of his translations. They're all incredible. He's finding, and sometimes page by page reconstructing, Dumas works that aren't well known. The Red Sphinx is not well known to even Dumas fans, and yet there was a big, gorgeous illustrated hardcover edition of the Red Sphinx just a couple of years ago. I've reviewed Lawrence Ellsworth a couple of times, and he is just engaged with Dumas for the rest of time, and he has a new Dumas translation coming out later this year. I hope it hasn't been delayed by COVID-19. These are big, beautiful productions. Oh my. Oh, but it's not the Count of Monte Cristo, which is the one I've kind of been waiting for. I was kind of hoping that I could show you that, but it's not the Count of Monte Cristo. In fact, it's like the Red Sphinx or the Last Cavalier. It's another big Dumas novel that no one's ever heard of. So we'll get to talk all about that once it shows up, once it makes its appearance. In the meantime, this translation will do just fine. So your Penguin Classic for today, of course, is a recommend. Of course, I am recommending the Count of Monte Cristo. And now I'm wondering if we have a theme going. I shouldn't, because it's just 2 videos, and so it could easily fall apart. But yesterday was Dracula, and today is the Count of Monte Cristo. So what's tomorrow going to be? is going to be another one of those cultural zeitgeist books, another book that has moved so far into the cultural collective consciousness that a lot of people don't even realize that it's a book. They think it was a movie. I don't know. We shall see. I'm intentionally not looking ahead because I don't want to make this didactic or overly didactic. I think it's boring enough as it is. So I'm gonna leave it here for now. We don't need another 35-minute Daily Penguin. I'm going to leave it here from now with, of course, a huge recommend. If you haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers, you should read both of those books. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. But I will be back. Thank you, Book 2.